Welcome to PhD with Women on IT, Hack the Future. My name is Beata and today's PhD, Positivity Hack Delivered, will be by Patrick Young. That would be my husband. Today's title is Breaking the Crypto Glass Ceiling. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, female leaders who are supported by men as well. This perfect example. My husband today jumped into the seat of a speaker because we had a bit of a challenge of finding a new speaker. Our other guest pulled out at the last minute. But who could be better speaker than today's guest? Patrick L. Young has written a lot of books on fintech, financial technology, and his latest book focused on blockchain, among other things. He's also the president, or used to be president, of Malta Blockchain Association. And blockchain is the latest buzzword in the market. Bitcoin is great, but the potential of the underlying technology is immense. Something that started as an evolution is soon going to cause a revolution. Industry experts and tech enthusiasts are coming up with the blockchain-based products every day. So wait not and get industry ready and break the crypto glass ceiling with Patrick Young. Patrick, where in the world are you today?
Well, this may come as a remarkable shock to viewers, but actually I'm just in another room of the same house that we live in Valletta in Malta.
That's great. I don't have to tell everybody where I am. I'm on the opposite side on the beautiful Maltese balcony, enjoying beautiful weather. We almost past lockdown. We are easing some regulations. We still have to wear masks, but it's not the topic of today's discussion. Decentralized finance has the potential to accelerate the end of cash in favor of electronic money. Patrick, you have over 30 years experience in investing, and you've been working online since 1994. Do I recall it correctly?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I was definitively working on the internet, on that early World Wide Web. Although at the time it felt a bit like the World Wide Wit. I mean, we were using, my modem was really advanced. So I had a 28.8K dial-up modem when most people were using 14.4. And I may well have been in business the previous year. We've never actually managed to work that out, although I have a stack of old-fashioned floppy disks, which someday, if the weather is suitably rainy, I might yet work my way through in order to discern just when I got onto the World Wide Web for the first time. But yes, in 1994, I was doing business on the World Wide Web, and I've never looked back.
And I am still listening with lots of attention, and I'm still smiling when I look at you. And I have to say that, is it a time to wave your book, your first book on the world of crypto? As we know it now, it's so obvious.
Well, this is my very first book from 1999, Capital Market Revolution. It was all about the future of finance in an online world and the future of markets therein. And that was quite the bestseller in its day. Everything seems incredibly obvious about it now, of course, Beata, because we're a generation later. But at that point in time, you've got to remember that most every procedure in finance and financial markets was incredibly analog. Computer technology was barely used. The most exciting thing you had was some new screens in your dealing room, which were going to turn around and give you the opportunity to look at prices as they were coming by. But actually putting in orders, actually being able to interact with the market electronically was impossible. And indeed, in my early years of my career, which had only been a number of years earlier, we'd been working on the floors of exchanges, and actually the floors of the financial markets in the stock exchanges and the futures exchanges were still the prevailing means by which the vast majority of transactions were done. And that's why Capital Market Revolution came to the fore, and that's why I was driven by it. And indeed, if you look through one of the copies you can get secondhand on Amazon, I make no money out of those sales, folks, you will actually find that I talk about the future of electronic money. I do not claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto. I did not invent the blockchain, and I don't talk about the blockchain per se in that book. But what I was talking about was how money can potentially be reshaped through having a digital persona. A series of ideas which seem to have become, well, they've caught rather the zeitgeist of the moment, I think, Beata.
Well, I can remember in 2013 when we opened our cafe in the heart of Poland, Toruń, the birthplace of Nicolaus Copernicus. You were talking about, this blockchain thing, this Bitcoin, the new currency, and we actually opened a local group, kind of brains who were driven by this excitement, and we had monthly meetups. We had people who wanted to swap cash, and at that time I think it wasn't really that big, and I was trying to understand and grasp what it was. So could you tell me, this Beata in 2013, she doesn't know anything. How do you explain blockchain technology to someone who doesn't know it?
Aha. Okay, so blockchain. You can read about that in my latest book, Victory or Death, which is all about blockchain cryptocurrency in the fintech world. It has a preface by the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, a man by the name of Jeffrey Sprecher, who's been incredibly successful in building exchanges and so on. And there's a chapter in that talks about this, the post-it note. Now, we've all seen the post-it note. God bless his soul, actually, the man who invented the post-it note, the co-inventor of it, just died a couple of weeks ago. The post-it note's famous because that's what you have when you're making a change inside something. If you're looking at a ledger and you've got all the names of all the members written out and it's taken you ages to write it out, and suddenly you want to make a change to one particular piece, you stick a little post-it note in it, and therefore it goes in, and that allows you to note down what has been the change, which is very, very useful for your ledger because you don't have to write the whole ledger out again. The thing is, of course, that's not so useful if you've got a colleague who also uses that ledger. So in 2013, we could have had one person in, say, Toruń and one person in London, in England. If you put your little post-it note into that ledger, then instantly you've changed the ledger so you remember what's happened. But of course, the person on the other side of the world has no idea what has happened to this ledger. The distributed ledger is, as I talk about it in Victory or Death, my book, like an electronic post-it note. Because when you write on the magic electronic post-it note, on a distributed ledger, instead of it going in one place finitely, it goes to every place where your ledger has been situated around the world. In other words, it is distributed to all the different ledgers where they are stored anywhere in the world. And that, of course, makes a distributed ledger very powerful, because say we're working in an accounting spreadsheet. If we change the value of something on a sheet, entry C32, we change from 50 to 100, it's changed in our spreadsheet. That's useful, but it's not much good for everybody else in the world who's all on a network. So if you use a distributed ledger, what it does is, like cloud computing, it sends the message all the way through the network and changes everybody's spreadsheet. But more importantly, because it's what they call a distributed ledger, it actually puts a little time stamp in there and says who changed it and when. So in this case, it would say Patrick changed the ledger from Toruń in Poland at 6:10 p.m. Central European time. And obviously that is a very, very powerful database style technology, because all of a sudden we know who has made a change. Everyone in the network knows who's made the change, what the change is, and it's what they call immutable. When I've changed it, no one else can change it back without having the passkey to that network and therefore being able to do something, which of course will also be recorded on the network.
That's a great answer, Patrick. Thank you so much. Great analogy. We've got some likes, some love spreading. Thank you so much, Trixie Lopez. Great couple on the show. That well, I can't really deny it. I thank you, Marianne, for your question. Great to see you, Patrick, in PhD. Patrick, what do you think is the best way to regulate crypto exchanges, or should it stay unregulated? That's a very tricky one, because I can see lots of hype and lots of youngsters who believe it should not be governed at all.
It's a terrific question, Marianne. Thank you very much. And let's take a little history lesson. Let's go back a couple of steps and think about when Bitcoin was originally created. And there's this man, he's probably a mythical figure, Satoshi Nakamoto. He may be an amalgam of several people, we don't know, but he wrote, or this group of people under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto, wrote the original thesis for the Bitcoin. And the idea of the Bitcoin was really for people to take back control of money. That's a very interesting point, because of course that would suggest that we're not going to have essentially regulation in the same way that we have in the world at the moment. And there are a whole series of issues about that, which I'm sure we'll get to later in the program, Beata. But to address Marianne's specific question, the simple fact of life is that we have a large number of financial rules the world over. Many of them are agreed from very, very large multinational organizations down, a thing called IOSCO, which is the International Organization of Securities Commissions, essentially the regulator's regulator, as it were. And there's also the central banks, and of course the Bank for International Settlement, and so on. And they all want to see orderly money. They want to see the world being reasonably regulated. And of course, national regulators are very concerned that people are going to end up investing in strange and wonderful things and lose their money. And if they lose their money, that's obviously a national catastrophe. Politicians get terribly upset because they may get voted out, and the regulators are appointed by the politicians. Now, you can see where this cycle is going very, very quickly, I think, Beata. And the truth is, Marianne, cryptocurrency exchanges have grown up mostly by being not regulated in any way to date. They've gradually been regulated in certain areas. For example, the New York Department of Financial Services has certain regulations, and gradually they're going into the European Union's regulations, etc. More importantly, we've also got this new chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is the US stock market regulator. His name is Gary Gensler. Although he spent a number of years while he was out of office during the Donald Trump era, looking at cryptocurrencies, the blockchain, and so on. And although he said he's very enthusiastic about the technology, the simple truth is his track record as a regulator and the statements he's already been making as a new regulator, as the boss of the SEC, the stock market regulator of America, is he wants to see crypto exchanges being regulated. And no matter what a lot of the libertarian rump, let us call it, of the original Bitcoin movement might think, my view is that practically we are going to see wholesale regulation of crypto exchanges the world over. And actually, we can already see there have been certain interesting crackdowns, such as, for example, most recently on an exchange called BitMEX, where we had irony of ironies on the day that the Coinbase exchange had its amazingly successful direct public offering onto the NASDAQ in the USA. At the same time, one of the founders of the BitMEX exchange was actually walking around New York with an ankle bracelet on because he's on bail, because his exchange was deemed to be, how am I going to put it, a slightly nefarious actor outside of the rules. So, Marianne, regulation is coming to cryptocurrency exchanges the world over. And actually, I think it will be a good thing because it will raise standards. It will therefore ensure there's not money laundering, that people understand and know their clients within the exchanges, and that will reduce, generally speaking, the amount of risk that some people may be taking, which is perhaps a little bit extreme for their overall risk profile.
Thank you, Marianne, for your question. Thank you, Patrick, for your answer. I would agree with that approach. And I would like to come back to the article you've written, and there was actually quite a lot of quotation going on. It's 2014, it seems like ages ago. The governments of the world have spent hundreds and hundreds of trillions of dollars bailing out a decaying Dickensian outmoded system called banking, when the solution to the future of finance is peer-to-peer. It's going to be alternative currencies like Bitcoin, and it's not actually going to be banking system as we had before 2008. So what exactly is Bitcoin or BTC, and how do you see the future, or you seem to call it the Ford Model T?
So yes, Bitcoin is really a benchmark in the world of electronic money because it's the first one which has been sublimely successful. And therefore people forget very quickly that in the 1990s, as the internet was growing up, we were already seeing electronic alternative monies growing. So for example, there was a thing called e-gold, which was essentially busted by the federal government of the United States of America. When I was writing the original book, Capital Market Revolution, in 1998, the buses, whether you were in London, whether you were in New York, whether you were in Sydney and Australia, which were all places that I wrote the book from, they were all festooned with advertising for beans, B-E-E-N-Z. And beans at that stage was going to be the future of money. And there were several other electronic currencies that were already up and running. However, as we know, the dot-com bubble exploded and then it festered out. And after that, we lost all of those first grade currencies, and we had to wait for essentially a decade before we saw this Nakamoto principle and this fascinating document whereby they said they were going to what they call mine 21 million Bitcoins. Those could be divided into very, very small amounts of Bitcoin, even a Satoshi, which is 1/100th of a Bitcoin, and smaller. And the point of Bitcoin is that there are only ever going to be 21 million of these currency in total. That's obviously very different, therefore, in principle, to the dollars that we have, or the euros or the pounds that we have in our wallets at this moment, because those are issued by a government, they're issued via the central bank, and the central bank can essentially keep printing as much money as it wants. And one of the reasons I was particularly agitated in the quotation that you had there from one of my TV interviews in 2014, which has gone somewhat viral on the internet, I have to say, was the fact that we've had these monetary policies like quantitative easing, and quantitative easing has essentially been printing lots of money at the central bank level, which means that over time, the value of the dollar in our pocket, the peso in our pocket, whatever that currency was, has been going down because there's a bigger supply of money. Bitcoin's the opposite. Although Bitcoins are being issued at the moment, there will be no more. I think it's about 2050 is the time that the last, I probably got that wrong, I'm sure, coming to think of it, might be 2150 by the time the last Bitcoin is mined. But ultimately, that's going to cause the end of the Bitcoin mining. There will be no more Bitcoins, and therefore the supply will always be restricted. And therefore, say the huge Bitcoin acolytes, aha, Bitcoins are incredibly valuable because there aren't going to be that many of them. There will only be a limited number in circulation. And that obviously excites people who are upset by the way that government over time has issued so much money in order to manage to pay its debts, pay its workers, and so on. So Bitcoin is like money. It's an electronically stored kind of money on one of these blockchains. But the reason I then go on to call it the Ford Model T of cryptocurrency is because although we had beans and things like that, if we take a car analogy, and I'm a huge car enthusiast, an old car racing enthusiast, The thing that's interesting there is, I mean, the 1885 Benz tricycle, the original three-wheeled car, which is seen as by many as the forerunner of the car. There are various other claimants to be the first car. They were all pretty primeval. I mean, they were all just like carriages in one way, shape, or form. It's only when we get to the period around about the First World War and Henry Ford in Detroit, in Michigan, designs his Model T. And the Model T Ford becomes the first popular car. Why do I think that's like Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin has succeeded in driving an ecosystem around it. And actually what the Ford Model T did was it built an environment around it for motorists. So people would drive their cars during the week, and they would drive the vans during the week, and they would use them for work. At the weekend, they would suddenly decide to go outside of the city and drive into the countryside. What happened to the countryside? Well, one thing was people in certain municipalities outside of the towns would put paving on their road because they realized if they had paved roads, people preferred driving on those rather than dusty or muddy tracks. Then people realized they had farms and actually they could sell their fresh produce from the side of the road to the motorists. Then other enterprising motorists, other enterprising people by the side of the road thought, well, what I could actually do is I could sell them a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. And very quickly what happened was people took the raw vegetables and cooked some of them. And ultimately we had very quickly the invention of the drive-in restaurant, the drive-in burger restaurant, etc. And that was a totally revolutionary firmament in motoring. It was the point when motoring upended civilization. That's what Bitcoin has done, because beans left no trace. All the other early electronic currencies, they're just things you can read about in fragments of Wired magazine or something like that from the era. Whereas Bitcoin is around. Bitcoin drove us to have electronic wallets. Bitcoin drove a payments infrastructure around it. As you were saying earlier on, Beata, we ended up accepting Bitcoin payments into the cafe co-working space we had for startups in Toruń and Poland. And that totally changes the world. And that's why I say that Bitcoin is the Ford Model T of cryptocurrency, because it's essentially hugely useful. It has changed the environment of how people see currency. But at the same time, ultimately, if I go out today, and I say this quite often in lectures, and I show people the keys to two cars, and I say I've got the key to a Ford Model T, or I've got the key to your modern everyday car, a Toyota Yaris, or something like that. Now, the relationship between those two, the DNA of the Toyota Yaris is 90% of the DNA of the Ford Model T, but everybody takes the Ford Model T, or takes the Toyota Yaris, rather, because the Ford Model T is antiquated. And because the Bitcoin was the very first thing that came out, it's built this infrastructure. It's changed the world. But in 10 or 20 years' time, is Bitcoin going to be the cryptocurrency of all time? I think not. I think other cryptocurrencies are going to supersede it. And in fact, we're already seeing that with the overall volumes. While Bitcoin has been having a very exciting bull run recently of pricing for most of the course of the last couple of months, nonetheless, other cryptocurrencies are becoming more and more important in the firmament.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Marianne, for your question. We've got Guian here asking us back to the blockchain question, asking us how secure is blockchain, or how secure is Bitcoin? Can somebody just steal it from your wallet?
That's a great question. So look, if we walk down the street with a wallet in our back pocket, we'll learn very quickly that people can steal it. That's why we tend to have our wallets in our inside pocket, or we put it in a handbag or somewhere that's secure, that therefore people can't reach it. With an electronic wallet, it's not quite the same thing. I mean, you can't just go and grab it off somebody, but people can hack into your computer. And therefore, we have to have a certain degree of security with what we do. And having a wallet where our password, for example, is little short of stupid, because people will very easily work out what that password is and they will try to steal your cryptocurrency. So of course, the world of hackers are driving people to try and steal these cryptocurrencies in the same way as throughout history, people have been trying to go where the money is and rob it. And that's why in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and the 1960s and 70s even, the big heist movies were always about trying to get into some vault and essentially taking out the gold or the money. Think Goldfinger in James Bond. Think something like, well, the casino movies, of which there have been a multiplicity, Ocean's 11, for example, in both of its versions. Nowadays, people don't have to worry about breaking into your bank vault. They try to break into your computer or your mobile phone and find out what your password is and take that money away. So the answer is, you need a safe wallet. You need something that's secure. You need a secure password. You need to make sure you don't share that password with people. All the sort of basic standards that you ought to have anyway for the security of your devices at all time, to make sure that people don't hack into your profile for YouTube or Facebook or something like that.
So in other words, you have to build your own infrastructure to make that Bitcoin secure.
No, you need to have your own security to make your wallet secure. In the same way that you buy a wallet and you put it in your safe handbag, you buy a wallet and you put it safely inside your jacket. So you need to make sure that you have got the right sort of antivirus software, you've got the right sort of the softwares that you should be using in order to make sure that things are secure. And equally, you should be looking at the security of the wallets that you download on the internet to find out that they are the ones that, generally speaking, the experts believe are pretty safe.
Thank you. Well, it's pretty much a good explanation. I have to say that since we are a community of women in technology and women who are interested in technology, I highly encourage you to join tomorrow's discussion, which is Malta Business Network. You can go to Malta Business Network Facebook page or LinkedIn page, and there is our previous guest, Jackie Taylor, who's been talking about security and privacy in the digital age. She is going to talk about security in the age of work from home. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion, not only for people who are interested in security of their wallets, but also about securing their assets, their passwords, and how to have secure work from home. Patrick, is it time to dive into the discussion about the central bank digital currency? Because we've seen quite a lot of examples. Can you tell us a little bit about what's been happening in that field?
Absolutely. So look, originally the Satoshi Nakamoto blueprint was all about taking back control of your money, and the people would finally manage to be able to discern their own financial future. They would have the opportunity to look after their money, and no longer would, as the libertarian strand of thinking would have it, the kleptocratic high tax governments have the opportunity to take your money. Well, not so fast. As the magnificent actress Goldie Hawn once famously noted on the Rowan and Martin show, "And the meek shall inherit the earth. The trouble is, the rich keep contesting the will." In this case, the contesting has been done by the central banks. And strangely enough, although actually in the history of money, central banks are not something that have been around for a hugely long time. I mean, the Federal Reserve of America is only just 100 years old. True, a couple of the major European banks have been that bit older, but even then, the Bank of England, the Dutch central bank, are only a few hundred years old. The bulk of central banks grew up in the 19th century, mid to late 19th century. Now, central banks have a role to play. They create money, they manage the banking economy, and we'll probably get back to talking a little bit about the future of banks in a moment. What's fascinating about that is, when suddenly the Bitcoin group come in and go, haha, we've got cryptocurrency, we're going to change the world, the central bank suddenly went, not so fast. And if you want to think about this for a moment, take a step back. What we're talking about here, in terms of what Bitcoin wanted to do originally, was little short of what I termed the Copernican revolution in finance. Because if you remember, Copernicus was all about the idea that at the time, the Roman Catholic Church believed that the world was essentially the thing that was at the center of the earth, the center of the universe. And very quickly, it became obvious that in fact, it was the sun was at the center of the universe and the earth was rotating around it. And that's exactly what Bitcoin was planning to do in terms of an upheaval, because it wanted to take the central bankers as being the center of the universe, as had been historically the case for the previous couple of hundred years, and in the case of government, essentially previous thousands of years. And they wanted to replace that by putting Bitcoin in the middle. And suddenly that would upend the whole financial system. Woohoo, one up for the people. Suddenly liberty is upon us, and not so fast, said the central bankers. Now what the central bankers are doing is they've looked at it and they've thought, you know what? The most expensive type of money to have out there is actually cash notes. What about we adopt the clothes of these electronic money people and create our own kind of a cryptocurrency? We'll call it CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. And of course, that becomes hugely important because there's two big strands to the market of money. And that is, there's wholesale money, which is what goes on between banks, between businesses, and so on. And there's retail money. And here's the rub. In the UK, in what they call real-time gross settlement, which is the interbank system, on any one day, little more than 2% of all the money exchanged is actually money between human beings. 98% of the money is money being exchanged between corporations and entities of a commercial nature in some way, shape, or form, including the government, etc. In other words, corporate money versus retail money. So central bank digital currency comes up with two basic theses. One is it can make the money market much more efficient by turning transactions electronic, by reducing settlement times, by reducing the risks of transfer, and ultimately, therefore, it becomes much cheaper and easier to do. Just in the same way that, look at the way that these days, none of us can manage to survive without shopping at AliExpress or Amazon.com or wherever it is, because it's easier to do electronic than having to put on our clothes, put on our shoes, and go out to the shops. At the same time, central bank digital currency is quite fascinating because, for example, as the financial historian Niall Fitzgerald was looking at just recently, the difficulty is that once you put things in an electronic form, it's quite possible that the semi-anonymity that there was with Bitcoin gets lost. And everybody knows who has what money in the system in a central bank digital currency. And that obviously has major possible impacts upon civil liberties, as in fact Neil Ferguson was outlining just recently in a very good Spectator podcast, for instance. So central bank digital currency is the Empire Strikes Back. We had Star Wars 10 years ago, that was Bitcoin. Now we've got the sequel, and suddenly the Empire has found central bank digital currency. It'll make the world look better, go better, but actually it'll control your money and help control your wallet while delivering a lot of efficiencies through the good old-fashioned US dollar, the pound sterling, the Japanese yen, or the Chinese renminbi, etc.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, we are past a half an hour. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to this hustle because empathy is my motto. And empathy is critical when you are breaking the a crypto glass ceiling. We've got another question from Trixie, and I know that Trixie's been following you quite recently. She's been on your show asking you questions, and Trixie is now curious and is talking about, I know you have this kind of newsletter, Patrick, and I'm kind of interested. Can you tell us something about it?
Trixie, thank you so much for asking. So, yes, I do have a newsletter. You're absolutely right. It's a daily newsletter. And in one sense, you might be asking because you're fascinated about the business of bourses. In another, who knows, perhaps you're looking for an insomnia cure because it's certainly a very niche topic. The newsletter is called Exchange Invest, and Exchange Invest deals with the business of bourses. So it's the business of every kind of exchange and exchange style platform in the world. That can be cryptocurrency exchanges, but most notably, it's the legacy stock exchanges. And therefore, we're read by the leading figures in the world of the exchange market. On public record, you can catch it on the Prosperity Conference a few years ago. On YouTube, we had the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, the chief executive of Intercontinental Exchange Group, Jeffrey Sprecher, notes the fact that he reads Exchange Invest every day. And it's not all men, I hasten to add, ladies. Far from it. We're delighted to have as one of our regular readers, Adina Friedman, and she's the powerhouse chief executive of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange, which is obviously the other massive stock exchange in America, and they collectively are the two biggest exchanges for stocks on earth. So Exchange Invest is a daily subscriber newsletter, Monday through Friday, which anybody can have a free trial to if they hit me up on social media. But at the same time, if you want to have something that's a little bit cheaper, actually free, we have a weekly podcast, the Exchange Invest podcast. There is my own live stream, which goes out on the Tuesdays, where we interview people on IPO Vid, which is all about a financial guest every week. And also on a Saturday, I have a free newsletter, which is mostly more about a little bit about macro politics, geopolitics, and some issues related to financial markets and so on. And that's completely free and easy to sign up to. You can find out more details at exchangeinvest.com, or you can track me down on most social media as Patrick L. Young. Thanks for asking, Tracy.
Or you can contact me and I'll be happy to control that and distribute that through my letters. Now we have a question from Zia Lim, and the question is, for what reason do banks create their own cryptocurrencies?
So central banks are creating their own cryptocurrencies because they want to maintain a certain degree of control over their issuing of money and their monopoly to this date of issuing money. They also want to try and make the payment infrastructure easier to affect. And therefore we have, for example, some very interesting cryptocurrency projects like the Sand Dollar in the Bahamas. Now, the Bahamian dollar actually is at par with the US dollar. But when you go to the Bahamas, you have to transfer your dollars, US dollars, into Bahamian dollars, and that can be a little bit finicky to do. So the Sand Dollar exists as a payment mechanism in order to make those transfers easier. So that's why central banks are doing it. Individual banks are looking at the idea of cryptocurrencies sometimes as some sort of an additional point of value in their business. But I haven't seen too many banks really going the whole hog and issuing their own cryptocurrencies yet, although some banks are allowing you to deal in cryptocurrencies. And there are some banks, legendarily, the most interesting one was a bank called Fidor Bank in Germany, which allow you to deposit all sorts of things. You could even deposit your swords and other ephemera from World of Warcraft in your bank account at one point in time. So the idea for banks in getting into the cryptocurrency business is obviously flexibility, customer demand, and the opportunity, of course, to manage to make a little bit more money. And the thing that banks like is they like making money wherever they possibly can on things that are slightly more difficult to price, slightly more illiquid, in other words, harder to trade, because that's where the banks can extort a monopoly rent for the process of being essentially trusted. And that's, of course, why we've been through this huge banking super cycle, which effectively presages the age of cryptocurrency.
Thank you, Zia, for your question. It's lovely to see so many men today supporting us and asking questions, and there are some ladies as well. We have Mike Velasco, who's asking, how could we capture the utilities involving the centralized finance market? That's a tricky one.
Well, We're jumping ahead in the narrative a little bit here. So let's talk about decentralized finance. Now, decentralized finance is something that is a big conversational topic on a lot of web boards these days throughout the internet. And decentralization is obviously the process of moving things onto a network where effectively the transactions take place away from where previously they took place, which was centralized markets. So why do stock exchanges work? Because they're a centralized place where traditionally in the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries, people used to go to those locations in order to trade. We've all seen the great floors of Wall Street, for example, at the New York Stock Exchange on our television screens at some point in time. And therefore, the decentralized finance movement is trying to turn that on its head. That's a fascinating concept. Technologically, it's perfectly easy to do because when you've got distributed ledgers, the whole point of a distributed ledger is it has what they call nodes, the points where the distribution of the ledger takes place. And those nodes all exist away from the central point of a network. So that turns the world on its head, whereas, traditionally we've always been used to information coming from a center point. And back in the day, it came only from the church. Then it came from, with printing, that decentralized things through the Gutenberg Bible and so on, and people could learn at home. But nonetheless, we maintained the shackles and the organization of centralized government and lots of other centralized points, such as exchanges. Decentralized finance is an opportunity whereby you can transact business, but it is not necessarily taking place in a particular location. Now that becomes very interesting because, of course, there might be a country that forbids you from, for example, buying Bitcoin, which there are many at the moment. In fact, several have been even cracking down recently and trying to stop people buy Bitcoin. Just in the course of the last month or so, there have been new restrictions in China, restrictions in Turkey, restrictions in India, to name but 3 countries. Decentralized finance cures that problem. However, here's the problem, Mike. You talk about capturing benefits, utilities from decentralized finance. My problem, and remember, I'm a revolutionary at heart when it comes to the capital markets and finance. Truly, in this case, Rome was not burnt in a day, because all of the legal system, all of the whole concept of our legal society relies on a kind of point of centralization. In other words, there has to be an exchange which says, yes, we oversaw the transaction. There has to be people who are responsible at the center of the transaction who essentially then are held legally accountable by the regulators and so on. Decentralized finance is running the complete concept that is totally anathema to our existing legal system. And I find that very, very challenging in the short to medium term, because we're talking about turning 1,000, 2,000, maybe more than 2,000 years of legal practice and precedent and coding on its head to suddenly arrive at decentralized finance. And I think that you're going to find that a lot of the people who have the sort of hippie commune dream that decentralized finance is going to be the future imminently are going to find themselves wearing orange jumpsuits, courtesy of the United States of America's federal government in the near future, because the Americans and other governments are going to be out to try and stop a lot of the decentralized financial marketplaces taking place. So therefore, I'm afraid I would almost disagree with your question by saying, I think a lot of the decentralized finance industry, they're going to find themselves captured by the legal authorities in the near future, rather than managing to capture anything else in terms of utility and value.
Thank you, Mike. I hope it answers your question. Thank you very much also for everybody who likes our stream, who loves and gives us attention. We have quite a lot of questions, Patrick. We need to step up the game. And so let's try with Nelia Mendoza. Is there any disadvantage of cryptocurrency?
Well, there are a couple potentially. I mean, one of them is obviously we need a different kind of safety in our cryptocurrency because it's held in your wallet and we need to work out ways to be secure, which involve a certain degree of technical skill and savvy, which may not come easily to everybody. Second of all, there's obviously an argument the world over about the amount of electricity that can be used by some cryptocurrencies. And this has been very much the case because we've heard organs of media such as the British Broadcasting Corporation or the New York Times and so on, complaining that essentially Bitcoin uses as much electricity as Argentina in order to process all of its transactions. Now, that's actually true, although at the same time I would argue back that actually if you look at how much money is spent to secure the existing banking system and run that, it actually amounts to a lot more electricity than is used for Bitcoin. And if you look at how much money is spent on securing the vaults where gold are, they essentially cost as much as the cost of running Bitcoin. But obviously, one of the disadvantages is that it's not tactile. I mean, we used to have gold coins, and they're obviously the most tactile form of money because you can feel it and it's an element and it's precious. The problems are mostly in how you deal with a money that is effectively not physical, and therefore it becomes quite different. At the moment, the biggest problem with cryptocurrencies, though, is they're not really that efficient in terms of transacting and moving around because they're at the very early elemental stages, which is therefore like the Ford Model T, they're not quite so reliable, they're not quite so scalable, and it can take quite a degree of movement and ramification in order to move your cryptocurrency around. So those are a few disadvantages of cryptocurrencies, Nelly.
Thank you, Nelia. Thank you, Patrick, for answering that brilliant question. We've got In Love and in Pain, who, as I mentioned today, we are breaking the crypto glass ceiling. So any questions are allowed. We are jumping from topic to topic, and In Love and in Pain is clearly a little bit confused. Just that question, what is the difference between Coinbase and Binance? Are they comparable?
Look, they are comparable. At the same time, one could argue rice and noodles are both foodstuffs, so they're comparable. Coinbase and Binance are each kinds of cryptocurrency exchange. As I was saying at the start of the conversation in Love and in Pain, what we have seen in the cryptocurrency market is that the exchanges which allow you to change your money, dollars, euros, pesos, whatever it might be, into Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies, they require an exchange. Coinbase and Binance are really just like an electronic version of those money changers that you get at the airport or you get on street corners, where you can walk in and change, your currency from one kind of currency to the next. They are different companies in the same way that, McDonald's and Burger King are different companies. They have an essentially similar kind of product. They have both become the most successful companies in the field of exchanges for cryptocurrency at the moment. But the big caveat is as follows. Their fees are very expensive to deal on because still the cryptocurrency market is expensive to deal in. And this is interesting because you think about technology and everything gets cheaper, right? I mean, the mobile phone you have today, your cell phone is 1,000 times more powerful and costs about 1/10 of the price of whatever it was you had 10 years ago. With cryptocurrency exchanges, bizarrely, the costs of dealing in things like Bitcoin are still very expensive. So actually they can be 10, 50, 100 times more expensive to deal in dollar for dollar than dealing on a normal stock exchange, such as the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ when you're buying shares. So one of the issues that's coming up, and you can read, I wrote an article about this for CapEx, the Centre for Policy Studies, a month ago on the day that the direct public offering of Coinbase took place. A problem for these exchanges are they're still not fully regulated, so they may yet suffer a crackdown. The cost of dealing is hugely expensive, and therefore you need to be careful when you're dealing with all exchanges, because if you deposit your money in those exchanges, unlike putting it into a lot of banks, you don't have a guarantee that you'll get your money back. So that's something you need to be careful about. Caveat emptor when dealing with all of the exchanges.
That's great answer. Thank you, Patrick. I've got another 2 questions, and I'm going to talk to Peter first. Then I'm sorry, Ika, I didn't notice your question. Let's touch upon Peter, who is asking about cryptocurrency being too volatile. With its volatility, what do you think of it being the future currency?
Peter, what a great question. Look, absolutely agree with you. I mean, one of the things that we want to see in our money is that the money is essentially worth the same amount of money day by day by day. I mean, it may fluctuate a little over time, but we want something like this. We don't want what is effectively volatility of the Bitcoin or something like that, which is just crazy. And you've got this ridiculous situation where you could have bought Bitcoin in the course of the last 12 months for what, $8,000. You could have also bought it for north of $50,000. In the course of the last week, there have been days where you could buy it at $50,000 and $30,000. That's crazy. No person in their right mind is going to go to bed at night and sleep on the idea that when they wake up in the morning, their money might be worth 2/3 of what it was when they went to bed. So therefore, cryptocurrency at the moment is behaving, well, you know what? It's like a rebellious child, or possibly like a kitten. It's running around the place, rampaging wildly, then it sleeps for a few hours, then it rampages wildly again. That's not the makeup of what is going to be an acceptable means of what they call a store of value. In other words, a money that you want to hold on to day as your basis of transactions. Because let's face it, you could get paid in Bitcoin today, and by tomorrow you might not be able to afford your rent with the way it's going in terms of volatility. So at the present point in time, the technology looks very promising to develop currency. And that's also why central bank digital currency is being brought out, because the central banks are coming out and going, look at us. We've got 100 or 200 years experience in the money game. We're not like these crypto kiddies, is the way that they're trying to frame the argument. We're mature. Our currencies are balanced. You trust us. Therefore, you want to use our money. Good question.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Patrick, for your answer. Actually, I want to come back to 11 years ago. Exactly in May, Laszlo Hajnec famously bought 2 pizzas with 10,000 Bitcoin, marking the first documented real-world purchase with Bitcoin. So in 2010, 10,000 Bitcoin equals $41. Now we are more into 370 million plus. So would you advise using Bitcoin as a payment mechanism, Patrick?
Well, look, some people do use Bitcoin as a payment mechanism, but it's clunky. It is quite expensive in terms of the transaction costs of what it does, although one could easily argue that it's cheaper than using a lot of the traditional banking mechanisms, which can be incredibly expensive. But again, we're going back to the question that Peter Allen Sampson just brought up a moment ago. The volatility and the price of the currency is just extreme. I mean, let's face it, I don't believe anybody in our lifetime is going to spend $370 million on a couple of pizzas, but certainly the idea you can go from $41 to $370 million in a decade, great investment for those people who are lucky enough to make it. But at the same time, I mean, it's not a viable concept that people are going to use it. Electronic payment methods, very important. Electronic payment gateways, going to be much more important in the future. People will use them a lot more. However, again, it needs to be something that has a certain degree of underlying stability. And that's not currently apparent in the likes of Bitcoin and a lot of the other youthful cryptocurrencies.
So Ika is going into the future. You touched upon it a little bit, but she actually wants to know exactly where the question is, how do you see cryptocurrency situation versus fiat money in 10 years' time, Patrick?
That's an absolutely fabulous question altogether, Ika. I mean, fiat money has obviously been the prevailing cash of our generation. And I mean, ever since 1971, when essentially the dollar came off the gold standard, thanks to President Nixon, we've been in a totally different world where we've just had money that is essentially the central bank and the government says, trust us, it's worth something. And in most countries that's worked, and in certain countries, like for example, say Argentina, perhaps most spectacularly places like Korea and Brazil, it hasn't, and they've had huge problems with maintaining a value to their currency. Therefore, I think what we're going to see is the difficulty here is we have a third factor, which is quantitative easing, which is the way that, for instance, the Japanese central bank owns what? The vast bulk of the bond market. It owns a third of the equity market there or thereabouts as a result of this funny money that's been going through the system for the course of the last 10, 15 years. And I suspect that how the quantitative easing plays out is going to be key. If the central banks get away with it and essentially we get back to some degree of monetary normality, then probably fiat currency is in with a chance. What I think is more likely is we're going to see an increasing distribution as people become somewhat, if not totally, more cynical about fiat money. And therefore, they decide to distribute themselves into other easily tradable assets. And therefore, tokens that are based around assets, effectively cryptocurrencies, are going to become more popular in the long-term stream of things, simply because people will use those as a liquid and easy way to manage to hold assets that are not actually US dollars or European euros or whatever. So those who say it's all going to be over in 10 years by the shouting, we won't have any fiat money anymore, I disagree. The idea that all money will be electronic, I actually disagree as well, because I think you will actually find very, very simply that some people will want to continue to hold cash, no matter how much the governments try to force them out of trying to hold that cash. And therefore, we're going to see a rise in the cryptocurrency market. We're going to see lots of new assets being denominated in tokens or crypto form. And that's how people will hold a great deal of their money. And that's going to provide a problem for the fiat money banking system, because there won't be as many things held in fiat money. And therefore, the whole underpinnings of the banking industry are going to have difficulty moving forward. But, and I haven't had a chance to talk about it totally this evening, we're in a 500-year super cycle of banks. So we're not going to see banks disappear. We're not going to see fiat money disappear. But, you know, it's going to be a little bit like the internet. I mean, there are people who don't use the internet, but the vast majority of people do use the internet. It just depends on how much internet people want to use. Some people use it to buy the shopping, to buy the groceries, to do all of their clothes shopping and everything. But actually, a vast number of people still go to shops and buy things physically. The balance is going to equate more towards the cryptocurrency universe over the course of the next 10 years. And that's going to put the fiat money universe under strain, even with central bank digital currency.
Patrick, I remember how you were talking about the fact that there will be not so many branches of Polish banks, like when we were walking through the streets of Toruń, and people were like nodding their heads like, what is he on about? Now it seems to be a reality. There are no branches no more. I mean, not so many as it used to be, like one part of the city and the other part of the center of town had branches of exactly the same bank. Now everything moves to digital. But since we are trying to break the crypto glass ceiling and we are trying to break these buzzwords, I would like to talk about another buzzword, non-fungible tokens, NFTs. Gary Vaynerchuk said that while the current state of affairs surrounding NFTs reminds him of the hype associated with internet stocks in the early 2000s, it's quite likely that the near future, the unique digital tokens will become the driving force for social currency. This is going to be the greatest era of intellectual property ownership. That's what he said. What's your take on that?
Brilliant question. Thank you very much, Beata. Well, that dovetails very neatly with the question we just had from Aika, because what I was talking about was how we're going to see people holding assets in different ways, in electronic tokens of all kinds of different forms. And essentially, I mean, the non-fungible token, as they're called, which is a bit of a mealy mouthful. I mean, non-fungible tokens are ways to hold bits of an asset. It can be a bit of a sports card. It can be a bit of an actual digital asset of some sort, which could even be the rights to a piece of digital art or photography or something like that. And I think Gary Vaynerchuk is right in the broad sweep. We are going to see that becoming a much bigger marketplace. It is going to become a hugely successful thing. The difficulty is, while I hugely respect Gary Vaynerchuk, he has made the comment as well that it feels a little bit like the dot-com bubble. And the problem we've got at the moment is the technology is not quite matching up with the ability to deliver. When did we last see that against incredibly frothy valuations? And of course, it was the height of the success of pets.com. And pets.com was just one of the many internet bubble stocks that disappeared, because actually, when we were on HTML 1.2 or 1.4, designing our web pages at home, frankly, Mayor Bloomberg, as he later became, wasn't far off when Michael Bloomberg, the head of the eponymous financial information company, said the internet sucks. Because it did. It was slow, the infrastructure was not great, things were expensive to do, and it was actually quite clunky to go and order stuff via even nascent businesses like Amazon. And we're in the same situation now. I think the biggest problem for the NFT business is it's probably got a little bit ahead of itself in terms of where it's going to be. We're going to see some sort of a bubble pop. There will be a retrenchment. But of course, what happened after the dot-com bubble imploded, we got Web 2.0. And Web 2.0 is the point where the Ford Model T suddenly became a much more usable car or a much more usable internet. And at that stage, we started getting all of the home comforts that we now take for granted on the internet, which are so much easier to use, made the internet the success it is today. And therefore, we saw the current boom, which has allowed, well, the stock of Amazon to go up by, good grief, many dozens of values in the course of the last 10, 12, 15 years, because it is an internet age. The NFT era is coming. But just like the 500-year super cycle of banks, it's going to take a little bit of time yet before it becomes truly ubiquitous. But it's certainly a big opportunity. And it's a great opportunity for everybody to break the glass ceiling, and particularly for ladies, because if you're in that element of the creative economy, if you're able to program, if you're able to code for these new types of market, it doesn't matter if you're sitting at home looking after your child. I realize that actually men should be doing more of the child raising, but the fact is women end up doing a great deal of it. You will be in a more flexible position. Working from home has demonstrated that during the COVID crisis, and therefore the glass ceiling that is enabled through the relative anonymity of working digitally is a huge possible success in the future. And I would exhort all of your viewers to hack the future, as you always say, and move forward, because NFTs, the opportunity around cryptocurrency, the opportunity around blockchain is for everybody.
That's great, Patrick. Thank you very much. As we head to the end questions, thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Patrick, can you please give us your favorite life lesson quote, and can you share how that was relevant to you in your life?
Okay, so it's a story. It is actually a quotation that I produced myself, and it is: the trouble with weather forecasting is that it's right too often for us to ignore it and wrong too often for us to rely on it. And it was picked up by a few friends of mine, including the current sheriff of the City of London, Professor Dr. Michael Manelli. He used it in a lecture at Gresham College in London. It was then picked up by various internet quote services and so on, and you find it everywhere. A lot of people think that I am a 17th century Scottish astronomer of the same name. As you can see, I don't quite look 400 years old yet, but certainly this was something I said. It has been the most fun to watch on the internet how that has grown, and to see you started with one of my other viral quotations, which has also been all around the internet. And it's a joy because every month we encounter a new and interesting person who's used this quotation. When it's Groundhog Day, lots of American newspapers write about us and have the lovely opportunity to meet people online and commune with them. There was a very, very nice chap who wrote for the Durango Herald, a fascinating newspaper out in the Wild West that heralded, well, it was at the boom time for the Wild West and the gold rush that it was at its peak. It's great fun. Say something pithy once in a while, and actually the whole world starts to commune with you over the internet. And that makes for a wonderful world of distributed conversation.
Great answer. Thank you, Patrick. And I love this quotation, and I was tinkering with it a couple of times. And I have to say that it really impacts women as well. We are sometimes looped in that idea that it can't be done, and we can see that the crypto glass ceiling can be broken. Are you working on any exciting new projects right now, Patrick?
Gosh, we're working on several exciting new projects right now. We are building 2 or 3 new exchanges for clients, and we're also working on a new exchange of our own project, which is really, really exciting. Hoping to make some announcements about that in the near future. One of the exchanges we're working on is in the small medium enterprise area. We're working on a very, very new token related what might one say, millennial issue exchange, which I think is absolutely fascinating. We've been providing advice on, and I'm working on a green exchange, which I think will help really revolutionize environmental social governance, green matters, and most importantly, social impact, which I think is a hugely, hugely important area of developing investment at the moment, because that's the way that we can manage to unleash and release the capital potential in this world of 7.5, 7.6 billion people in favor of those who are still left working at under $5 a day, and particularly women, because women are the most powerful asset in the economy in the world right now, because they are underpaid and yet they are capable of huge overperformance compared to where we are now, particularly thanks to the tools that the digital economy deliver to us.
Well, I can say that we can not only break crypto, but all the glass ceilings in the world. And time for viewers' favorite question, and I hope it's not going to be too sickly, because I actually didn't want you to say that you want to have private breakfast with me. So where would you like to have a private breakfast with, and who would you invite to private breakfast once the pandemic is over? Anybody in the world, anywhere in the world.
Gosh, well, I'm going to pick the place because that's the hometown of the person I would like to have breakfast with. It is not you primarily, but you are invited if you would like to possibly make it. I think it would be great to go to New York, because New York is one of the great cosmopolitan mega cities of the world, like London. I mean, pretty much all human life is there, every possible nation, race, color, creed type of person. It has an incredible energy and dynamism. And there are so many magnificent hotels, restaurants, places that you could possibly go for breakfast that I'm at a loss to decide which particular one I would choose right now. And I think I would probably let my guest decide, because my guest would be one of those women who I think is sensationally dynamic. She's absolutely incredible. And of course it is Cindy Gallop, because I think Cindy Gallop, in terms of raising the glass ceiling, blowing it apart at all points in time. I mean, she has a great strap line. I mean, what is it? She likes to blow things up, which is a great strap line. I unfortunately come from Belfast, so therefore I can't say that, because it could have unfortunate connotations if I keep saying those sorts of things. But she's someone who's come through the advertising business. She's indomitable. She is formidable. She will be fascinating company to talk to. She has a multitude of entrepreneurial and interesting ideas that are driving entrepreneurship forward. And therefore, I think she would be the person I would choose to have breakfast with in a suitably lavish locale of her choosing in New York, because it would make for an absolutely sensational meeting of a great mind, and I would love to encounter her and talk to her about that.
Well, I have to be there. You have to promise I'll be there. To stay updated, ladies and gentlemen, and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered, please follow Women on IT and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. With guests like Patrick Young, with guests like we have next week Elaine Montilla. She's going to talk about actions a company can take to retain talent. Thank you very much again, Patrick. Thank you very much to all the questions, Marianne Madera, Guyan Melvin Kayaor, Trixie Lopez, Zia Lim, Mike Velasco, In Love and in Pain, Nelia Mendoza, Ika Paduo, and Peter Alan Sampson. I'm very grateful to all of you and every one of you. I hope you got inspired by today's positivity. When you focus on the positives get more positive. Today's positivity quote comes from positive thinking only and goes, look for something positive in each day. Even if some days you have to look a little harder. Once you replace negative thoughts with positive ones, you start having positive results, as Willie Nelson said. Thank you very much. I wish you a great day, night, wherever you go, whether it's New York, whether it's Cindy Gallop, whether it's breakfast at Tiffany's. If you don't like it, like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Today is your day to hack the future. Hack the positivity you want. Women on IT, hack the future today and tomorrow. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.